on these stories. I think it helps when we read these stories to actually see the places. Gives us better understanding of what's going on. Because I know before I got the chance to go to, April and I got a chance to go to Israel, you know, you hear about the Jordan River, and yeah, of course you can look up pictures on the internet now and see anything, but when we think of river, we think of the Ohio, at least I do, and go right down to the riverfront and you got the Ohio. Well, the Jordan River is a dirty little creek compared to that. We wouldn't even call it a river probably. So there's just a lot of differences between here and there, so it helps to see the differences sometimes. And I know I've showed this slide before. I think I showed it when we were talking about Ruth, about how towns were built. But the reason I bring this up, this is Beersheba in the southern part of Israel. And, you know, when archaeologists go into these places and start doing digs, they'll dig down and find some ruins, and they'll determine, you know, various means. Well, this is from whatever, 800 AD. And then if they want to go further, they've got to wipe out that layer, destroy it to get down to the next layer. And all these towns and villages throughout this area of the world have been built and destroyed and built and destroyed and built and destroyed many, many times. But what's interesting about Beersheba, most of what they've dug down to at this point, they said is a certain strata of civilization, and they dated it to around 1100 BC. So that puts it right in line with the time of Samuel. And if you look at 1 Samuel 8, the beginning of the chapter, it says, when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. So when we're looking at these foundations of these houses and streets and so forth, I think it's a reasonable assumption based on what archaeologists have dug down to here that you're actually looking at the town that Samuel's sons probably lived in and served as judges in. So it's a direct tie back to the Bible there, which I found really interesting. Now moving on, if you go to the east from Beersheba, you're in the Negev, and this is a picture of that area. But what I want to point out is you're in kind of a flat land, maybe some really low hills. It's pretty arid. I think about 8 inches of rain a year, but it's enough to grow some grass, and you've got some shepherds that, you know, use the area. And that what's really green that you see in these pictures is because they've irrigated it. It normally wouldn't be that green. But if you look out to the background there, you see some hills or mountains, whatever you want to call it there, starting to rise up. So that's the Judean wilderness that crops up. That's a very arid, really desert region. It just quickly drifts to desert. So I want to spend some time in there today because this is the area that David was running from Saul around. Of course, Dan mentioned that as he's gone through the book, but it was throughout that region that David was hiding. So I wanted to spend some time in there. That was, yeah, it's some kind of crop. I don't recall. Now in Israel, they grow a lot of, there's a lot of citrus fruit, which of course that's not, but date palms, bananas, and then some other various things. I'm not sure in that case what it was, but yeah, I don't know why what appears to be grass is watered, but nothing else seems to be. I don't know, but it's just the way it is. But when we think of the wilderness, that's where David was hiding out, the Judean wilderness. You know, I picture going out to a big national park out west and mountains and, you know, thousands of acres, millions of acres of forest or whatever. But the Judean wilderness looks like, well, it's very small. It's 60 miles long by about 15 miles wide. So I'm not sure. I meant to look it up on how big like McCracken and Graves County is and so forth. It's probably, this area is not much bigger than that. It's a pretty small area because Israel itself is a very small country. But the wilderness area is that 60 by 15 area, and it looks a lot like this most of the time. It's, yeah, like Utah. There's a lot of it that is kind of like that. You don't see any trees. It's very dry. You get over near the Dead Sea area, you're looking at maybe 2 inches of rain a year, which shows up maybe once and actually floods the area, and then it's gone. So this is the area that David was running from Saul in. So you're talking about verses, or 1 Samuel chapter 21, 22, 23 area. He mentions being in the desert of Ziph. Ziph was a town out in this area. Just some other photos of driving through. Just, again, it's very, very barren. Once they get that little bit of rain, I guess the shepherds might show up there and try to let the crop, or their flocks eat a little bit of the grass that's growing. You can kind of see a little bit in these pictures, but there wasn't much there. And we were there right after the rainy season, so this is about as good as it gets. This is right at the Dead Sea, same type of environment, very rugged, very dry. And of course, the most famous part, I think for David, we read about, is him hiding out in En-Gedi. So En-Gedi is right along the coast of the Dead Sea. And this is an aerial view, which I did not take. But just to give you an idea, the overview of it, En-Gedi is a little oasis. And it's interesting, you notice these cliffs way above the Dead Sea there. The tops of those is roughly sea level. Not much different than our elevation here in Paducah, but roughly sea level. And then it takes a 1,400-foot drop straight down to the Dead Sea, because the Dead Sea is the lowest point on Earth. So it's 1,400 feet below sea level. And in En-Gedi, you notice this one particular cliff there has some greenery around it where they've irrigated some and used some of that oasis water. You can go around to the left or the right. To the right there, where I've got that arrow, is what's actually known as En-Gedi. So you can start climbing back up through that area. And when you do that, it's going to look about like this. If you look in that picture, you're looking down out through it. You can see the Dead Sea in the background. And you see there actually is some greenery because there's a very small stream that's running through that valley. Just enough to water a few things. Yes, sir? That is salt, yeah. So that, or even the one back here. So the Dead Sea is not nearly as big as it was back in biblical times, because both Jordan and Israel are taking all the water out of the Jordan River to irrigate crops. So there's not as much going here, so it's shrinking. So yeah, where it's shrunk back, there's just layers and layers of salt that are left. But yeah, so you start walking back up through this little narrow cut to En-Gedi, and you can see why David wouldn't want to be there. He's running from Saul. Saul's obviously trying to kill him. You get back up in there, it's very easy to defend because there's only one little narrow path to come up through it. You got high cliffs on both sides of you. And these are the walls that you see on either side as you're walking back up through it. I don't think Saul's army had rappelling gear, so they weren't going to come down from the top. And you noticed there's a lot of references to caves and David being in caves. So there's one verse here from chapter 24. Saul was told David is in the desert of En-Gedi, so Saul set out to look for David. A cave was there, and Saul went in. David and his men were far back in the cave. And, of course, we know the story where David crept up and cut off part of his robe, and then later came out and told Saul, look, I could have killed you, but I didn't, so why are you chasing me? And, of course, Saul somewhat repents, but then, of course, immediately goes back and starts chasing him again. But there are these caves constantly throughout this region as you walk up the valley on both sides of it. Another view with some more of these caves. And you really get a sense when you're in there and you see these pictures of what David was talking about in his Psalms. So that's one thing I'd really encourage you to do when you read 1 and 2 Samuel, is go back, and there are a number of Psalms. got a list here, which I don't expect you to write them all down, but Psalm 18, Psalm 52, 54, 57, 59, 63, and 142 specifically say at the beginning of the psalm, Psalm of David when he was running from Saul, a Psalm of David when he was hiding in a cave. So they're very specific to the narrative that's in 1st and 2nd Samuel. So I think it gives you a much better perspective of the Psalms if you take the time to read those as you're reading the narrative. I don't know if any of you all have the daily chronological Bible. So the one by, and there may be others, but the one I know is edited by F. LaGard Smith. He does a really good job of taking these psalms that have a specific place in Scripture, in the narrative, and inserting them in there. So as you're reading about David running and he's in a cave, he'll put in Psalm, 57, and you can read that, and you can really get the mindset of where David was and why he's reading, writing this out, pouring his heart out to God. In fact, I want to go ahead and grab one or two of them here. So, of course, that's Psalm 18 that I've got there. Psalm 57, like I said, it starts out, when he had fled from Saul into the cave. Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends his love and his faithfulness. Later on, my heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul, awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the skies. I mean, he's pouring out his heart to God about, save me from these people chasing me, but then he also comes back and praises him for just doing just that. So I would encourage you to find those Psalms and read them along with the narrative. But you see, of course, in Psalm 18 here, he talks about the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and that's where he was. He was in this barren place with these really high walls on either side of him, a place he could defend, where Saul couldn't get to him. So as you walk farther up through the valley, you're getting toward the end there. You can see the greenery again, the streams coming down, and you can just make out at the very end there, kind of in the notch in the corner, a little bit of a waterfall. And I think Dan showed a picture of this when he taught the class. But when you get to the end there, this is the waterfall. And if I'm trying to remember back, I'm pretty certain that two images are the same one, just from a different angle. But you can see actually in the one, there's actually two little waterfalls. So you imagine walking back through that barren rock, you see a little trickle of a stream at the bottom, and actually you get back to the end, and this is coming seemingly out of nothing, out of this rock. It's pretty amazing. But obviously, you get back in there, it's easy, like I said, David could defend it. He's got a water supply out in the middle of this incredibly barren area. So it's a beautiful little spot, and you can see why he ended up there. So next, I'm going to jump from David back to Saul and kind of the end of Saul, which you see taking place in around 1 Samuel 28:31. So, but to give you some background here, so this is obviously map of part of Israel. It's the north central area, and kind of help you lock it on. Up in the upper right there is the Sea of Galilee. I hope you can read that from where you're sitting. But so just below that, to the west, you've got the Jezreel Valley, which I've got kind of circled in green. It's kind of an arrowhead-shaped valley. And just to the left of that is Mount Carmel. Now, these mountains in Israel, Mount Carmel and Mount Gilboa, we'll see here in a minute, aren't just like a little peak that comes up and it's one spot. It's a big ridge line that runs for many miles. So Mount Carmel is starts up kind of in the middle of Israel, and it curves over toward the Mediterranean Sea. And it provides a kind of a wall there between the lower part of Israel and this upper part, the Jezreel Valley. And I just pointed out right in the middle there, kind of, well, south of, or the southern part, I've got big letters, Megiddo. There was a pass there through the mountains, one of the lower areas where you could actually work your way through the Mount Carmel, not have to climb over the top of it. And so that was a very, I'll say, popular route to take. So if you were the Pharaoh of Egypt and you wanted to come up and fight perhaps the Babylonians, if they were coming down from the north, you would come up out of Egypt across Mount Sinai, or across the Sinai Peninsula, and you'd come up the coastline, the flat coastline of Israel, where the Philistines were, and you come up, and then you'd hit Mount Carmel and kind of get blocked, but you'd find this little pass that would allow you to take your army through it, and it comes out on the other side as the town of Megiddo, or the hill of Megiddo is Har Megiddo, so that's where we get Armageddon out of Revelations. It's just pointing to the fact that this was the place where the armies fought, because it was the pass through to the north, and if you were, like I said, a northern group, Assyrians, Babylonians, you could pass through to the south through the same thing. So Megiddo, it just happens to be the place where it's easy to cross the mountain. And that's why we find Saul fighting the Philistines here as well. The Philistines would have come up from their region along the coastline and passed through this mountain pass, came across in Megiddo, and end up in the Jezreel Valley. So the Jezreel Valley is like, just like it said, it's a wide open, flat space with water, very good for agriculture, and I guess a good place for armies to spread out and fight each other. It shows up numerous times in the Bible. If you go back to, if you call Gideon and the Midianites, exactly where they're, same place. It's where he fought them. That's in Judges 6 through 8. Of course, we're getting ready to talk about this battle with Saul and the Philistines. Coming up, as Dan goes forward to the 1st and 2nd Kings, this is where Elijah was. You recall Elijah going out on Mount Carmel to have battle with, if you will, the prophets of Baal on lighting the sacrifice, as he did that there. If you call Ahab the king of Israel, and he basically had, with his wife Jezebel, had Naboth murdered so Ahab could steal his vineyard, same place. There's lots of biblical stories that take place right here. So that's basically, just want to point out that's where it is in this north central part of Israel. And specifically, kind of drill down into it a little bit, where I've got the red box is Mount Gilboa. As it comes up, that ridge line comes up into the center part of the country. And there's a circle right above that. I don't think you could read these from there, but it's the spring of Jezreel, same as the valley. And it's right there that later on, again, Dan will cover this as he goes through, Omri, who was Ahab's father and the previous king of Israel, he bought some land from a guy named Shemer, and he named the area, the city after him, which we now call Samaria. That was the capital of Israel. That's right where that circle is, right at the foot of Gilboa. So when we're talking about this battle with Saul in 1 Samuel 28, and then later on in 30 and 31, this is where it takes place. So you've got the Israelite army with Saul was somewhere right there where that red circle is. Where the green circle is the town of Shunem. That's where the Philistines were camped. If you go up just north of that, the little white circle is the town of Endor. You recall that's where Saul went to meet the witch to try to call up Samuel's ghost, where he didn't just try, they did call up Samuel's ghost. And of course, Samuel told him, well, you're going to die tomorrow. And And then the yellow circle toward the bottom there is the town of Bethshan, which is where Saul's body ended up. So just to give you an idea of how that flows. So now to see it kind of visually, the white circle on the right is the Jezreel Spring, so that's where Saul was camped. And it is, like I said, it's a spring of water that comes up there. That's why there's some trees. The circle to the far left is the town of Shunem. And you can make it out on these pictures. You can kind of see some white area there. It's the houses now because they're all built out of concrete there in Israel. They kind of show up white. So that's the town of Shunem, where the Philistines were. Now, if you recall last week, Dan talked about kind of the end of, or right at the end of David's life. He couldn't keep warm, so they got him a live hot water bottle, as he referred to it. This young girl, she was a Shunammite, so she was presumably from this little town of Shunem right here in the Jezreel Valley, which another tie-in with this little small place and many Bible stories. So Saul's, camped out here, like I said, by this spring and this group of trees, preparing to fight the Philistines. And if you're standing looking out, the far backside, that mountain you see in the background is Mount Moriah, or the Mount of Moriah. Another Bible story I forgot to mention. I did mention. That's where Gideon fought the Midianites. He went up on the mountain and came down and attacked them. So that's the hill that shows up in that story. But if you're standing there looking at this and you turn your head to the right, you're going to see this, and that hill there on the right side is the far northern end of Mount Gilboa. So it's right there past the spring. So in the battle, we know that the Bible tells us that the Israelites were hard pressed and they got pushed back up onto Mount Gilboa. So presumably Saul and his whatever men he had with him had just having to retreat, and the only place to retreat was up the hill. So they start going up the hill, and somewhere at the top there, somewhere on the mountain, Saul meets his death. He's wounded, and then he falls on his sword, and eventually is killed with I forgot the man's name now that told David that he was dead, but he basically tells the story that I found him. He was still alive, but he was dying, so I went ahead and killed him. So it's somewhere right up on that ridge of Mount Gilboa. Now, the Bible tells us there in chapter 31, let's go ahead and read that, get over there. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell slain on Mount Gilboa. Philistines pressed hard after Saul and his sons, and they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. Fighting grew fierce around Saul. When the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. After the battle, it says, the next day when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and they sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim the news in the temple of their idols and among their people. They put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreths and fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. So Beth-shan was that town I mentioned, that bottom right corner, the yellow. So it's probably 8 to 10 miles from that tip of Mount Gilboa. And so Beth-shan is this hill that you see there. And I'm pretty sure Dan showed a similar picture. Later on, there was a great Greco-Roman city built just below it called Scythopolis that was part of the Decapolis. If you remember the New Testament accounts of Jesus going into the region of the Decapolis, the 10 cities, Scythopolis was the capital of it. And so you ever get a chance to go over there, it's fascinating. It's a huge city with all these ruins. It's really neat. But at the far end of it is the former town of Beth-shan is that hill. But if you walk up to the top of that hill, whoops, come back here. You don't see much. There's some ruins up there, you can tell some clay bricks that are disintegrating to the rain, but there's really not much to see. However, I would point you to the background. If you notice that ridge line that runs across the back, that's Mount Gilboa. And the very far tip to the right, see this, it lowers down and then has one last little hump and it drops down almost out of the picture. That is that piece of Mount Gilboa. So you can actually see it from Beth Shan. So it wouldn't have been too much of a problem for them to collect the body and take it over to Beth Shan and mount it on the wall. So that was the end of Saul. Gives you an idea of where all that was and how that took place. Now I'm going to jump to David and David becoming king. If I can get my slides in order here. So the one thing that is surprising, and you may all know this, but the city of Jerusalem, when David got control of it, was a little tiny area. It's about 10 acres total. Now, modern picture of Jerusalem, it's going over every hill around the area. It's over the hills, past them, very large city. But where I've got that red circle is roughly the area of the city of Jabus that David attacked and took. Again, very, very small little area. It sits on the ridge with the Kidron Valley on the left, which is what the greenery you see there. There was another valley on the right and one also on the south side. Some of that over time, over the millennia, has clearly been filled in with probably debris and garbage and ruins of the city as it's been attacked and rebuilt and attacked and rebuilt. So they're probably not as steep as they once were, but it's still a pretty steep valley on the Kidron side. So if you're up on top of some of the buildings there in the actual now city of David, the area he attacked, and you look down to the bottom of the Kidron Valley, it's pretty far down. If you were a enemy army coming up to attack Jerusalem, and you had to try to run up that hill to get to the wall to kill them, it probably would not be a very pleasant experience. So in fact, that little circle there, I don't know if you can see it in the picture, that there's a person walking on a trail down there. You can see how tiny they look. So it's a pretty significant hill to climb to if you were going to attack. So that's why the Jebusites chose this location. It was, again, very defensible because you had steep valleys on every side. And, really important, it had the only water source in the entire region for many miles, which is known as the Gihon Spring. So I think the next one is too far. Okay, so obviously somebody's drawn what they think it looked like when David attacked it. And that area to the right there with the red circle is the Gihon Spring is down on that side of the Kidron Valley. And they know that they built some towers there. The Canaanites would have built towers there to protect that area, to keep it safe so they could keep their water source safe from enemies. And the reason they know that is because they found the towers. So you actually go underground. I'm still fascinated by how they did this, because even in the city of David's part, they've tunneled underneath. People still live there. It's really more of an Arabic Palestinian area, but they've tunneled underneath it and found these ruins, and then somehow built supporting structures so that everything above them doesn't collapse, because there's people's houses literally right above this. But this is the ruins of one of those towers that you actually go underground and take you to it, and it's still there from probably at least 3,000 years ago when it was first built. So you can go actually see that while you're walking underneath people's houses. So this would have been what was protecting the Gihon Spring. So if you recall the story, 2 Samuel chapter 5, David comes up to Jabus, this town, and the Jebusites are pretty confident in their defenses, and good reason that they would be. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, this is 2 Samuel chapter 5, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and lame can ward you off," they thought. David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. On that day, David said, "Anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say, 'The blind and the lame will not enter the palace.'" So, how'd they do that? Well, it's interesting. So if you get back into these tunnels, you can find the old Canaanite tunnels that led to the Gihon Spring. And what you're seeing here, you're kind of up above it, you're looking down into the actual basin that the spring flows into. And the Canaanites cut basically a doorway, it's what that circled there, that would let the water flow from in this case, the right side, through it into the left side, which is where they had a shaft that apparently they carved out so they could lower buckets down to get the water so they wouldn't have to go all the way down to the bottom. And so one of the other tunnels you go to, and this is kind of hard to see, but that is the water shaft that I'm kind of looking down. You got to hold the camera like way out trying to get a picture, but you're looking out the water shaft, and what I've circled at the bottom is some light that's coming through that doorway that I just showed you the picture of. So, like I said, they cut that to let the water in, and this is the water shaft that apparently David's men climbed up to get into the city. You read the story, and they read it for hundreds of thousands of years, and then archaeologists within the last 100 years or so actually found the water shaft, proving the Bible. So they apparently climbed up that to get into the city, and then, of course, and took it. And then the next thing here, if you go all the way down to the bottom of it, you can actually, it's right at the pool of water. I bring this up because when we get into 1 Kings, Dan is going to talk about Solomon becoming king, and it mentions that in 1 Kings 1, verse 38, they took him to Gihon to anoint him. So apparently they took him down to the bottom of this spring, and that's where he was anointed with oil, becoming, as we've talked about sometimes here recently, Meshiach, the Messiah, the anointed one. He became the anointed one right there, way down in the bottom of that spring. Now, I don't know why they took him there. Well, right, and of course they do present him immediately afterwards. They have a big parade to present him before everybody. So I don't know if it was just something symbolic about the spring. I'm not. Yeah, I thought that too, because it seems like a long way to go out of the way to get down to anoint him. But yeah. So if you continue on in 2 Samuel chapter 5, it mentions that after he took the city, David took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the supporting terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful. Well, what they've discovered on this ridge, like I said, that was the original city, this stone structure here, foundation, that was obviously added at some point to support a large building. And if you'll notice at the very top of the picture, you can kind of see some framework with some lights on it, which we're going to go look at next, what they found underneath it. Again, this is, if you look right above that, you kind of see there's literally people's houses. They can't be more than 2 feet above above where the tunnel is. They've tunneled underneath them somehow. But if you get up, what was this supporting? What were all these stones there for? Well, they get up underneath that, and inside that structure, they found a foundation of what most archaeologists believe is David's palace. They built up the foundation so they could make the palace bigger because it was on such a narrow piece of land. So they think this is David's palace. They actually have found some seals, like you would use to melt, put your seal in wax to notarize something in a way. They found some seals that are people that are actually named in the Bible that were, I believe these were Solomon's, some of Solomon's administrators, its names, and they've actually found the seal, like Gedaliah, son of somebody, I forget how it goes now, but so they found it right in the same area. Well, if those people worked for the king, makes sense that they were probably in the king's palace, and that's why they think this is David's palace that he actually built, which is pretty neat. Artist's conception here, what they think it might have looked like. Obviously, we don't know, but there's that stone work on the side to help support it. And obviously, this was at the top of the hill, basically almost to the top. Eventually, the temple went on the very top, but top of the hill, that's where David's palace was. When he went out at night, he's going to be looking down the hill, which is probably how he happened to see Bathsheba, because she was in a house below him. Got him in a little bit of trouble, but he was at the top. And one other interesting thing that tells us why this might be David's palace, if 2 Samuel 11, after he became king, Hiram, the king of Tyre, kind of congratulating him, he sends him messengers to David along with cedar logs and carpenters and stonemasons. Well, Tyre was part of Phoenicia. Hiram was the king of Phoenicia. This is that purple strip there, kind of in present-day Lebanon. Well, what difference does that make? Well, what's interesting is the lower left here, this beat-up ancient capital, goes on top of the other picture is kind of an artist's conception of how they would have been used on top of a column, but that beat-up piece of rock they found there in the area they think is David's palace. And what's really interesting about that is it's not Israelite design, it's not Egyptian design, it's not a Canaanite design, it's not Greek design. That design is Phoenician. Why would there be Phoenician artwork in the city of David? Well, probably because the Bible tells us he got Phoenicians to build his palace for him, so it's a pretty amazing tie-in archaeologically to prove the Bible. So anyway, I think that's all I've got. Yeah. Just like I said, hoping to give you some visual references to tie in the story to that. I hope it helps. I think sometimes it definitely makes it clearer for me when I can see where it happened and what was going on and how the land is laid out. Do you have any questions or comments or anything I can help clarify? Uh-oh.
Ecclesiastes 1:7 says all rivers run to the sea, yet the sea doesn't. So how can something be 14,000 feet below sea level?
1,400, yeah.
1,400
Yeah.
feet below sea level and it's not back up again.
Evaporate. It's evaporation. It's really hot and dry there, so it just gets there and evaporates as fast as it gets in, I guess. And yeah, that's why it leaves, and it leaves the minerals that the river carried down to it, and they get more and more concentrated, more and more concentrated. So that Dead Sea is the saltiest body of water on earth. I don't think it's possible to drown in it, because you get in there, you can't sink. You pop up like a cork, literally. So, any other questions, anything? Well, I'll give you a couple minutes back, and we'll see you all in worship here in just a few minutes.